Jim, welcome everyone to this regularly scheduled board meeting at South Tahoe PUD. Would you all please stand and join me in the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for coming. Do we have any comments from the audience on non-agenda items? Once again, the audience is staff. Do we have any corrections to the agenda or consent calendar? Not hearing any, so how about a motion?
I move we approve the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
And that passes 4-0. We need to continue our emergency action. It's knocking on this one.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mike Chuffo. I'm the acting supervisor of the pump crew. Chris Stanley can be here. He's in training right now. But I'd like to give you an update on the pump number 2 for El Tahoe. As far as the parts, I called Reed Electric, and the part should have been here as of yesterday. And if all goes well, the pump should be ready for pickup next week. And I request continued emergency action to repair El Tahoe sewer pump number 2 and the purchase of an additional pump pursuant to resolution number 3075-17.
I'll give that a so moved, but we can discuss that if you guys like.
I'll second it so we can discuss it if we need to.
We even need to?
No, I don't think so. This is just mainly just to keep. We have to keep this emergency open until
keep the emergency.
until we get the pump. So that's why it's on the agenda.
Will the emergency stay open until we get the new pump, or just the repair pump?
My recollection, and I think we talked about this a little bit at agenda review, and Gary, I believe you weighed in on this as well, that once we have the new pump installed, the emergency would be over, and so we could then end the emergency item, even though we've authorized and are purchasing this other pump as a backup.
Because the second one's a backup and the emergency would be
But
over.
the emergency itself would be over.
Okay. I think we're all on the same page on this, so we can go ahead and vote. And passes 4-0. Thank you. You got an easy one. We'll make you fill in some time when you get a hard one.
Quick and simple.
Yeah. Okay, Ms. Flitzo.
Good afternoon. The district received a claim from the Harrison family in the amount of $6 million on the unfortunate death of Charles Harrison. This incident happened at close to the intersection of Pine and State Line, and the district has been out there. We have looked around, and we don't have any type of infrastructure or anything in those places. So today I'm asking the board to reject the claim, but if you'd like to discuss this further in closed session, we can do that as well.
No, I don't know about you guys, but I think this is an easy one. Unfortunately, the guy died, but I don't see anywhere in any way responsible. So I'd like to agree with Mr. Wilson.
Yep, I agree with you. I'm also sorry that he passed away, but I see this as just one of those where everybody gets sued and then they sort it out later, sort of thing.
Right.
Who else has been sued?
Haven't heard, to be honest with you.
I spoke with the city, the records department, and with the district attorney's office, and they were served also.
It's everybody.
Okay.
I'm sure they did.
Oh, you want to go ahead and make a motion, Lloyd?
I'll make a motion that we reject the claim against the district in the amount of $6 million for the death of Charles Harrison.
Second.
And it passes 4-0, thanks. Okay, South Y feasibility study, EVO.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, good afternoon, board members. Item 6C is to accept the cost amendment request number 1 in the amount of $284,000 from Kennedy Jenks Consultants for out-of-scope professional and engineering design services for the Southwide Feasibility Study remedial alternatives. What I'd like to do in this short and brief presentation this afternoon is kind of just focus on walking through the funding for this project and not really talk about too much the technical aspects of the project. I think that's covered in the Kennedy Jenks proposal, and I think we've gone through several presentations before as far as for the need for the project. So I think at this point, what I'd like to focus on as far as is about the funding and kind of how we got to the request for a cost amendment when we haven't really even started the work on the project. So the Southwide feasibility study, this project's been pretty much, it started in late 2015 actually. And what we're trying to do with the Proposition 1 grant is we're building on existing project work that was completed back in 2016, and we're using the funds that have been already expended and leveraging those costs as match funds for the grant. So we'll look a little closer at that in the next slide and talk about how the actual costs are distributed by the different parties involved with this grant. So in the grant process for Proposition 1, it started back in July of 2016 when the district first submitted a pre-application. And this was part of the work that was done through the groundwater management plan and talking with the SAG as far as how to approach this groundwater contamination problem in the Y area. In September 2016, we received an invitation to submit a full proposal. So that would be the technical proposal. And that was submitted in November of 2016, and you can see the costs at that point, what we submitted on as far as for the scope of the feasibility study with a total value of close to $600,000. So the State Water Board takes a look at your full proposal, and then they grade, competitively against other technical proposals that are submitted, and they decided that our proposal was deserving of a preliminary award, which we received in March 30th of 2017. And since March 30th of 2017, we've been doing things to get to the point of entering into an agreement for that funding. So during negotiations with the State Water Resources Control Board, they suggested and offered additional funding for collection of information similar to what we did at the Lucan Brothers number 4 well, basically collecting hydrogeologic and engineering design information that could be used for the design of a groundwater extraction pump and treat type system to help capture and contain and remove PCE from the groundwater. So we considered that offer, and we then started planning for this, what we call a pre-design investigation. And also, after the preliminary award, we received a template for the agreement, and in the template for the agreement, there were additional grant requirements that we didn't include in the original scope of work, which was in our full proposal. So that also added to the costs. And so where we are today is that that bottom number for the agreement, and so we went from 588, 540, and we were up to 963, 824. So I mentioned that a lot of the funds, the match funds, is again based on project work that dates back to 2016. Here's a breakdown of that project work. So we had the South Y extraction well suitability investigation. You can see the amount there. Tahoe Keys Property Owners Association, they funded a PCE investigation where it was basically a compilation of existing data, historical data, to get an idea on the spatial and temporal distribution of PCE in the South Y area. We spent money on preparing the planning grant, so that is also can be used in the match, and that's on the third line. We started in and developed a fate and transport model for evaluating the remedial alternatives, so those costs are in there. And we've also done some pre-evaluation sampling prior to the feasibility study, and those costs are in there. And those come up to a total of a little under $270,000 that we've already spent to date. All of that funding work, all of the district project funded work outside Tahoe Keys work was all using El Dorado County Water Agency cost share program funds. So that was split in half, 50-50, between the district and El Dorado County Water Agency. Now, for in the future, or 2017, 2018 fiscal year, we see that there's going to be some additional pre-evaluation sampling that will be done for the project. And we have about $205,000 in cost share funding that has already been allocated from the El Dorado County Water Agency for this project that we are going to use for the project, and to meet the match for the updated amount, that 48192. So as far as the breakdown for the total project, so this is close to $1 million project. You could see that the district share is a little under, it's about 24%. So the county, water agency, and district share are both at 24%. Tahoe Keys shares about 2%, and 50% of those monies out of that close to, or $963,000 will be coming from the State Water Board. So if you have any questions about the funding or about the project, I'd be happy to try to answer those questions now.
Are there chances that we're going to get reimbursed by either insurance or somebody else?
There's a requirement for cost recovery, but this is for a planning grant. So the requirement for cost recovery that they have is for construction, and so that means a lawsuit typically to get recovery on those funds. So I don't see anything immediately that would make us whole for the funds that the districts have already spent on this project.
We had one of our meetings there with the grant agreement. Even I've talked about this quite a bit. It was structured a lot more for a construction project, and it required certain things that are just not applicable to a planning grant. One of them, frankly, was the district had to make some effort to recover funds from parties. We're told that that's not applicable here, but I've been a little bit out of pocket. I have not had the chance to circle back with their attorney. He called me near the end of last week, and so it's on a half dozen points along this type of line that we'd like to see cleaned up in the grant agreement, just to clarify. And if they won't modify the grant agreement, my thought is to get a side letter with them confirming that some of these provisions would not be applicable and place additional requirements on the district for doing this work.
$500,000 that we let slip for this project.
Well, no, it's not $500,000 out of our pocket.
It is in a way. Half of it is ours and half is from the El Dorado County Water Agency. But those are funds that we should get anyway. We could have used those on something else. So essentially, we lost, another $230,000.
Yeah, Lynn couldn't be here. She's at TRPA, I guess, this afternoon, doing another presentation. But she mentioned that there are a lot of additional costs that there are costs for legal services that have not been rolled into the match yet. So a lot of the expenditures for 2017, 2018, we hope to again use district labor, in-kind services, legal services costs to meet that a little over $100,000 that we're showing as our match with the County Water Agency funding.
So
Well, I'll move we accept the proposed cost amendment request number 1 in the amount of $284,000 from Kennedy Jenks Consultants for out-of-scope professional and engineering design services for the South Y feasibility study of remedial alternatives.
Second that.
We have part of the grant requirements on this for this project are to hold at least one public outreach meeting. I think in our planning we're going to have 3. We'll let you know when the first one is. Jennifer Lukens has been trying to obtain the Tahoe Valley Elementary School site as for the first public outreach meeting. And she was trying for February 7th at 6 p.m. So we'll let you know if in case any of you would like to attend. She's expecting a lot of her ratepayers to be there. People from the State Water Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Board will be there. Obviously, Lukens and Tahoe Keys will be there. We'll be there. The city has indicated that some of their folks will be there as well. So it's a bit.
Tahoe Production, the city has contacted Tahoe Production House to film it, to be able to live stream it as well. So you can't be present that way.
Just something to add on the PCE aspect is that Tahoe Keys had a presentation yesterday by the Kendi Jenks on what they can do to treat the bloom that's hitting them. And they've got about 12 different alternatives they're going to look at, different combinations of new wells, upgrade, treat, things like that. So it doesn't look like they want to connect to the utility district though.
That was one of the alternatives.
Actually, it was two of the alternatives in different combinations.
And I think that was required by the state of California. The state's going to do a grant. I know Lupin's had to do the same thing.
Yeah.
They forced them to consider that alternative, and we ended up providing some information on that so that they could move ahead with giving them a grant to build a treatment facility and not think that, just open the intertie and problem solved, right?
But then there are a lot of people out there that don't want to have anything to do with us, so. Okay.
Well, you should have been changing that, Jim. You're our spokesman down there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Evo. In the middle of that discussion, that did pass 4-0. So.
Okay, thank you.
Payment claims.
I'll move approval for payment of claims in the amount of $2,027,697.29.
Second that. Seems to be my role today.
Number 2.
Okay, that passes 4-0. Next on the agenda is the announcement of the 2018 board appointments. I think that this past year everything worked pretty well with the assignments, the board appointments we had. And since our last meeting, nobody has contacted me and told me they were unhappy with anything. So I'm going to make the same appointments this time. We're just going to carry forward with one minor change. Chris Cephalou is now going to be on the finance committee with Dwayne Wallace. Otherwise, everything is going to be the same. I just thought it might be, Chris was on the finance committee once before. I thought a fresh set of eyes on it. And,
good.
Dwayne, there would be.
You've got a lot to do as chair too, so that seems fair.
So basically, Melanie, I think that you can just take care of that in the minutes. I don't need to read all this off. Okay. And actually, what I should have done, Kelly's not here. I should have stuck her with all kinds of stuff. It's usually the rule of thumb. You miss a meeting, you get punished. Which moves us to standing and ad hoc committee reports. I guess I will go first. We had a meeting with the city again last Friday, and lately the main topic of discussion with the city, their primary focus has been this TCE problem, and we talked about the meeting that's upcoming that Richard just talked about with the grant funding and ways that we could use that meeting hopefully to get some more information out to the public about this process.
And hopefully put some additional pressure on.
To use this to help light a fire under certain agencies that need to be spurned on. We also discussed about the affordable housing thing. Was there anything else on the first topic I mentioned that you wanted to add to that, Richard?
No, just that they're very supportive of having this. They realize it's a big problem for all the water agencies in town, and they're all their city, and all these people live in the city limits. So they expect to have people there, and with the idea that they would be asking some hard questions in the public, the question and answer period of Lahontan, and probing them in terms of why things aren't moving faster, and putting them basically on the spot in front of the public. That's their plan. So I would be surprised if Wendy and Brooke weren't there.
I'm guessing they're there, and they were. I mean, as we were in the meeting, they were setting up the television coverage.
Yeah, they were
and
shoving
everything
across the
else.
hole to get that going.
They literally
While
had
we're
it
sitting
set
there,
up
yeah.
before our meeting was done. So they're very interested in getting the public informed on this, and even though, you know, the city has nothing to do with water supply in the basement, they think they have a critical role because it is their constituents that are affected.
I'm glad they're paying attention.
Gary?
Since you're on this topic, the RP, as you recall, the water purveyors, all three had submitted letters to Lahontan criticizing the revised work plan of the RPs. The RPs submitted a response to the water purveyors' comments in about an 18-page letter.
When did that come out?
It was just last week.
Just last week, yeah.
Actually, Richard, Evo, and I are meeting on a couple topics after this board meeting, one of which is this, to kind of figure out some strategy related to that. But an interesting thing, you're talking about the timing, we've been waiting for the state board, or the regional board, to respond to our comments, hopefully, and give some direction to the RPs to revise their work plan again. In their RP's comment or response letter, they said that the regional board was going to respond to the water purveyors' letters, which was news, at least to me. We were waiting. Our aim at giving the comments was to give the regional board direction on what we think was missing from the work plan, the revised work plan that the RPs had prepared. We were not expecting, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about with Evo later today, and we can update you at the next board meeting. But it's basically, I think, get back in touch with the regional board and get them to respond to the revised work plan. They don't need to respond to us. So that's a little bit odd.
So maybe by our next meeting, we'll have digested their response, and you guys can give us a recap on that. Okay. One of the other things we talked about in the meeting before I move on to this, Richard, is we did a kind of a post-mortem on Snow Globe, and explained how everything went from our point of view, and told them about the crazy people in costumes that stormed in bunches, and the after party on New Year's Eve in the parking lot or close by. And
That was our employees.
that was their employees. Is that what that was? But anyway, they were glad to hear that we were appreciative of all the help that they provided, and they also were glad that they were able to make changes on the fly as needed, and noted the few minor things that they could address better next year. So I thought that part went really well.
And our involvement was talked about, and I think appreciated by all. And so I would expect that would be the model. I mean, that's the plan. That's the model for moving forward. If in fact Snow Globe is held at the same location, I guess there's some. I took it there's maybe some question about that.
I don't like the looks of that one grass field. That's for
yeah,
sure.
that one field, from a distance and from the pictures, it looks pretty beat up. I haven't walked out and looked at it if anybody else has, but they said some of the comments.
I drove by it just the other day, and it doesn't look good.
Yeah. I mean, some of the attendees said they called it the Mud Bowl out there, but just that without any snow cover and everybody trampling on it for 3 days, I guess got kind of muddy, which tells me that obviously the turf was torn up.
It is kind of fun talking with them about it. They have funny stories too about the stuff that happened. And then the last thing we talked about, you guys all have a memo here. This all came about because we told them that we were interested in helping out with their workforce housing plans, but we needed something that we needed something from them so that we could act upon. And this is just kind of a rough draft. Their attempt to kind of define what this, either you call what you want, workforce or low income or whatever housing is, and then based on that definition, we could think about changing our ordinances to possibly benefit that, or at least to make it to where we're not an obstacle to this happening.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it.
We didn't talk about it
They
very
just
much.
handed us this and said this was sort of a starting point for us to be looking and considering making some, ordinance change ourselves, and obviously reinitiating the transfer ordinance that we used to have for a couple of decades, that we eliminated about 2012, I think it went defunct. So. Well, that's if you read this, I think that's what they're talking about, and that's certainly what we're talking about. We're not just sort of talking about, when you say transferring, the district doesn't have own sewer units to transfer. It's people like the city and the CTC.
Yeah, they actually, because there's no actual project in mind, it's kind of hard for them to do, but they want that ability so that if the opportunity comes up and they've got sewer units, they want to be able to move them over.
My recollection is when we discussed this previously, is one of the things we were asking the city to do is for them to develop some sort of ordinance associated with low-income housing, particularly one that says, for them, this is what it is, this is who qualifies, so that we could then write an ordinance that would point back at their ordinance and say, don't come to us for qualification, go to them for qualification. Right. And so that level of clarity, this goes, like you said, starts the discussion, but we need an ordinance from them that we can then point back to. It was my recollection.
Yeah, and that was the intent when they gave us this memo, is just this is to get the ball rolling, take a look at it, see what you guys think of it, and we can, discuss it.
Yeah, ask questions, and I mean, they say that even though they had a bunch of definitions, they say near the end of the memo that the focus is on the low income as opposed to workforce housing, even though they've been used intermittently, but their focus is on the low and very low, income people. So I guess the question is, so would their projects be, put together such that there's an income limit on, like I think at the Aspens, I think there's an income limit on being able to rent at the Aspens project. If that's the model for the future, I guess that would be the question to ask based upon these cost indexes. I would assume so. That's yeah.
I'm not sure. What are they asking for? A 20% reduction on water and sewer? Is that?
No. They
these alternatives.
The existing thing is they just pointed out in the memo that that's already something we have in place. Anybody who qualifies as low income with Liberty can come over here and bring that qualification, and we give them a 20% discount on their service charge.
Okay.
They were just pointing out that we were already doing something for the low-income folks in town. I thought it was
we also
nice
have the Helping Hands program too.
Yeah, they could add that. That's yeah.
We have to be careful if we're going to be reducing rates.
No, we haven't. Our discussion at this point has really been focused on that connection fee on the sewer side issue, and having folks being able to utilize, like the city and the county or the Forest Service or the CTC, to try to encourage low-income housing, is to be able to use their sewer units that they have in storage on other lots, is to transfer them over, and that we wouldn't charge the transfer fee for those sewer units.
I'm just concerned about eating into the budget anymore. We've already reduced our income by over $800,000 a year just on the reducing the connection fees. That's the sport's been reluctant to raise the rates in order to cover those losses. So anything more, we're not. I figure we're not a welfare agency. We provide sewer and water, and we have to maintain that system.
Just for the record, we've already had this discussion a bunch of times, but if your price is too high, you don't have any customers. And nobody is paying us if they're not building. And so it's better to get the monthly charges than to have high connection fees and have no customers at all.
I haven't seen, a rush here on
No, we
connection
haven't.
fees by people that are,
But it's,
have,
we certainly wouldn't have had it at the other prices. But that's all I got to say. We disagree.
But I mean, it's a lot of money. It's over $800,000 a year we're losing because of that. And actually, it's more than that because that's a reduction from what we had a couple of years ago, which should have been much higher because we didn't raise it from the original program that we started about 10 years ago.
We shouldn't have started this, but the pie chart when I left in '06, I think it was, the connection fees were about 25% of our income, and they're down so low now. I think it's about 5%, something like that. I'd have to look over and see, and one of the reasons is nobody can afford it. Besides properties being eaten up, and not as many left, and so the price goes high. So not as much buildings going on. I give you that, but it's certainly not $800,000.
Oh yes, yeah, that's what we're losing. I mean, on the other side, anybody who's building, they're going to save $400,000 or $4,000 per sewer unit. And that's on a $500,000-$700,000 house. That's a minimum, cost for building a house in this area. So the only ones that really made out on that are the spec builders and some of the people who already had enough money to qualify to.
Well, the only thing, this program is focused, or any reason for this definition is we want to provide this waiver of transfer fees only to housing for the low income. We don't, because we want to encourage that kind of construction as opposed to McMansions, who I think all of us kind of feel we've got enough of them already, and they don't need any more financial encouragement. If we're trying to get more housing for low income people, let's put our basic kind of money where our mouth is, and let's join the effort to get more in town. I mean, that's why we have our own staff. A third of the people live in the Carson Valley. Because they can get more for their money down there, and there's very few homes being built. In fact, if you look at this chart in here about their definition of workforce housing, probably covers 80% of our own staff. I mean, that's not their focus here on the program, but by the definitions in this memo, about 80% of our staff fits into the workforce housing.
The city has got to make some decision on these vacation home rentals and some of the other things where they're taking up housing that could be used for low income. But you go to any other community that's, people want to live in, like a Vail or Aspen or Jackson Hole, they have the same problem. And I just...
So we don't want to make the same mistakes they did.
No. And it just seems like every time one of the cities get involved in something to provide low-income housing or subsidize things, it just goes, way off, because then it's, well, include me too, and you get
put
so
the
many
government in
complications.
charge of the desert, pretty soon there'll be no sand. That's what you're saying. I agree.
Say that again?
You're a conservative.
That's
You didn't know
a
it.
famous Milton Friedman quote.
You didn't know it.
Is if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert, within 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand. So Milton Friedman, he was pretty good on some of those.
I like it.
But anyway, we're getting way off the subject here. So let's get back to
This meeting.
Yeah.
We did, and
It is our meeting.
and we also discussed, and as I mentioned at the ECC meeting, a couple of drainage problems that are existing in the city, and asked for their assistance. And then I think Chris Stanley's not here, but he said he already had received phone calls from the city, and also that we've also, I think Evo's gotten a call. Jason Burke is going to be on the TAC for the grant. He himself had declined, but evidently when we informed Nancy Carey as to what we expected, what I got from Evo, what Evo expected, what kind of assistance from the city participant, they assigned that back to Jason because it was a little bit more technically oriented position as opposed to a council member or something like that. So he's back on the TAC. He was on the SAG, for the groundwater management plan, but he'll be back on the TAC.
Okay, are there any other standing or ad hoc committee reports?
And just, I don't know.
We can move on to board reports if you have something, Dwayne.
Well, just very little. I attended the ECC meeting, which was very well run and extremely well attended. I was impressed.
They must have heard you were coming.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Put the word
That's
out.
the most I've ever seen. I think it had more to do with what was being served for food. But I talked to him. Shannon had given me some of the background notes of some of the things that we're doing, fire suppression and the reasons why we're doing them. Talked about the upcoming board election and about some of the reasons we go to Washington. And what else was it, Shannon? Let's see. The fallen leaf. I gave them a lot of kudos again for the work they did last year, putting some of the pump stations and making them electric, and somehow not spilling anything, and how close we are to the sand and those kinds of things. And talked about asset management, how important it is right now to try to get a real good grip as best we can on what we're going to need in the future, because we have our Prop 218 issuance coming up. That's it.
Very good. Any other board member reports, Christian?
I'll be attending the CASA conference along with you next weekend. Jeff Lee will also be there. I've already talked to Nancy. One of the sessions I was going to attend is the CSMRA workshop, and I know that we're considering reviewing.
Is that the one early Wednesday morning?
Yeah. So I'll be there for that. And I know we're looking to compare them. So, and she at this point she said there's not really anything that I need to ask or know that, unless you can think of something since I talked to you earlier. So if you want to go to that session, bring your flak jacket.
Well, I don't think they get flak jacket. They're the ones that should have the flak jacket on. We pay them all this money and they never cover anything.
Right.
You know, it's just like, I mean, and if they're surprised that we're considering pulling out, it's like, yeah, that's a pretty easy one to answer, you know. Insurance companies, in case something happens. You guys aren't an insurance company. You're never there. So I'll leave you to represent us in that meeting, Jim.
Thank you.
I think I'll pass. Anyway, is that in on board member reports? Okay. Is there anything new with the El Dorado County Water Agency, Richard?
No, Jim and I went to the meeting. Jim filled in for the last.
Oh, you filled in.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jim.
Yeah.
I asked you.
Yeah. Really, there weren't any big decisions are made. A lot of it was just updates on some of the programs that they're doing, and Ken Plain is getting in, and for the long haul, so he's wanted to look at all of the projects. And I also attended the Water and Power Alliance, was that it, or
Authority.
And they're moving ahead too on a few things, slowly.
Well, so their water rights project with their regional partners is just moving slowly. It's lots of lawyers and lots of environmental scientists involved, and just got to. As with large legal processes, it moves very slowly. But it's a regional approach, and I think it's the only one that stood a chance of success in the long run. Otherwise, when they started off, there wasn't a regional approach, and they had a lot of opposition. And I think their concept of using high flows in the American River and allowing it to, when it's high flows, allowing it to go down and have the Sacramento-based partners use that for groundwater, recharge, I think is a real positive approach. and one that makes sense regionally. And then the Water and Power Authority meeting wasn't too contentious.
They didn't throw anything or each other.
Yeah, it seems like the supervisors and EID directors kind of rough and tumble group down there.
EID, I've attended a few of their meetings, and they're very rude to each other.
Oh, yeah, they've been, but they had Coco sitting at one corner, and who's the other guy that they get together, bang heads. He was sitting at the other end of the table.
Well, actually, the Day, I think is his name, I don't think he was there. The one guy that is causing a lot of stirs the pot a lot.
Well, yeah, but the other one that was there, I forget, Prada.
Yeah.
Prada's the one that they've gotten into it too, Coco.
Anyway, Ken Payne's, as I think everybody we've said, that Ken Payne's agreed to become the permanent GM at least for, I think he's agreed for and there's a 5-year contract as opposed to continuing to serve as an interim consultant. So I think he's doing a good job of getting everybody on board and kind of explaining the projects. And they might be ready to move into their new office by the next meeting, depending upon AT&T's wiring schedule for the phones. So they're moving up closer to Placerville and can save some money, and it'll shave about 10 minutes off our travel time to the new office. So, yeah.
Off Mosquito Road.
But they're not moving in to the county offices, which we think is a good thing.
Well, I couldn't agree more.
You're on a roll, Rich. You
Okay.
keep going.
The other thing I wanted to mention is we saw it in the paper. The Wendy David is initiating, sort of coffee meetings with the public. And the first one looks like it's scheduled for January 24th at 9 o'clock. And if our budget meetings don't happen that day, I think I can go. And then the next meeting, Shannon said he was willing to go. The next meeting, I will be out of town, so it's in the 3rd week of February. So maybe a couple times, we should go make sure, and see what the topics are. So if anybody wants to join,
I think that's a good idea that we're represented there. We're obviously not going to try to steal the spotlight at all, but if anything comes up related to the district,
yeah.
I think it's a good idea to have us there. So.
No, I think it's good to have a board member there and staff maybe.
So
I can't do it next week. I'll be in Aqua or Costa, but next month.
So yeah, we'll just keep an idea on the schedule, and I might go to one
it's
here and there
at
too.
Pete's Coffee place in Railings.
Oh, okay.
On January 24th.
Right, that one. So she's going to move it around probably.
Yeah, she's going to move it around.
Yeah.
I don't know where the next one is. So that's all I have.
Okay. Luther Pass Pump Station.
Luther Pass Pump Station. So previously the board awarded to FlowServe a contract for $400,000 for another 700 horsepower pump at Luther Pass. And this pump again was to serve as backup in the event that we needed to, if one of the existing 700 horsepower pumps were to fail, we would have something on the shelf that we could essentially put in place and continue operations. And a big piece of that is the way that system is designed to run. There are 4 pumps. That system is really designed to run 2 700 horsepower pumps and 1,000 horsepower pumps at maximum capacity. And I'll come back to that point in just a minute. After the board approved that, we contacted FlowServe, told them, hey, we've awarded this pump, this contract to you. And that contract was submitted to us, their bid was submitted to us with no exceptions for roughly $400,000. However, when we contacted them, they said, well, what about the exceptions we submitted, and what about the other emails which we weren't really aware of that they had even submitted. And doing some investigation, discovered that they had submitted separate documentation that said there were a bunch of exceptions, and some of them were quite material, significant issues. For example, the bid that they submitted and said there were no exceptions to included both the pump and the rotating element within the pump and an extra rotating element. Well, they said that their bid did not include the extra rotating element, and upon asking them what the price was for that, it would be another $150,000, which wasn't included in their original bid. So all of this gave us great concerns, and while that was taking place and that discovery was taking place, during the January 1st holiday, we ended up running two 1,000 horsepower pumps and one 700 horsepower pump at Luther Pass during the holiday to catch up with some flows that were coming into the plant at a fairly high rate. And we were able to do that for really the first time on utility power. We've never really been able to do that before. Because we were able to run under that configuration and do that successfully on utility power, and the concerns that we've got with what they've submitted us in their bidding process and lack of communication and again a lot of fairly material issues with their bid, we have decided that we don't want to award that bid at this time. What we would prefer to do is go forward, with a company out of Lodi called Martech, which has done the rebuilding of pump number 3, the 1,000 horsepower pump, and have done a good job and give us good follow-up service for that unit. We would like to, once we're past the rainy season or the spring thaw, take one of the 700 horsepower pumps, send it down to Martech, have them crack it open, go through it, rebuild it, and once we're satisfied that that unit's up and running, rebuild the other 700 horsepower pump. And we would rather go that direction. The caveat being that if once we crack open those 700 horsepower pumps, we discover that they're not in condition to be rebuilt, then we'd like to pursue purchasing a new pump. So at this time, what we want to do is go ahead and hold off on the award to FlowServe for that 700 horsepower pump purchase, go through this rebuilding process with Martech of the other 700s, and if we decide yes, okay, we're comfortable with going with the rebuilt 700 horsepower pumps and don't want to do this purchase, we'll bring back to the board an agenda item to rescind that authorization to purchase that 700 horsepower pump, or we'll come back to you and tell you, yes, we're going to go ahead and purchase that 700 horsepower pump if that's the right thing to do. Any questions on all that? I know it's a little bit convoluted. It is not the direction we were originally planning to go on, but with the discovery of being able to run those 2,000 horsepower pumps during peak season here, and we were on utility power, it really opened up another avenue of operation that we didn't believe we had before.
That was
because of the transformer switch over and all that.
Yes, and I believe the work that's been done out there with the higher efficiency pumps and the controls, et cetera, and the way those pumps start now that they're starting on soft starts, they're not loading the system
so
like they were.
The max you could draw was 2 700s and 1,000.
Correct.
1,000, and so then now you're able to do the higher one. No, it makes sense. I mean, why?
So it puts the 700 horsepower ones. One is the lag pump, and the other one is the standby.
Standby.
As opposed to having to be in the lead and lag.
Right.
So it's a good thing because we get more water pumped over there.
What are you doing with the bids right now?
Right now, we've contacted FlowServe and told them that, and asked them essentially, will they hold their price going forward, and they have not responded to us.
They're probably going to say no.
Yeah.
I suspect actually they're not going to respond until we go back to them in several months. That would be my expectation.
What was your time frame for acting on the bids?
It's not a bid. It wasn't a construction bid. It was a purchase, and so I would have to ask Linda what our purchasing time frame was. I'm not sure, but again, what we're doing is essentially asking them to hold their price. We may have to go back. I would expect we'll have to go back to them for a new price if we decide to purchase a new pump.
Because we're talking the summertime, by the time they get these pumps pulled and
Yes.
torn apart and taking a look at them.
And their exceptions, they had so many exceptions to the bid. The purchase document we have now is, I mean, with any other purchase or any other bid, they would have been rejected.
Absolutely.
I mean, material. I mean, saying all of a sudden this $150,000 rotating element isn't part of their bid when their bid actually says no exceptions and it's required in that document.
Was it a bait and switch type thing?
I don't think it was that strategized.
Miscommunication.
I think it was just bumbling.
I'm going to say that was going to be my guess.
Because there were 3 or 4 people involved from the company,
Right.
different people sending emails and
The different
signing the
people
bid,
and,
you know, just.
I will say, just as a follow-up to Luther Pass, so Martech, they rebuilt that 1,000 horsepower pump. They really at their own initiative said, hey, we want to come up, that pump is still under warranty, we'd like to come up and we want to check it out, see what's going on. So they came up, actually they came up Friday, and I think last Friday, they identified that they had some concerns they thought there was maybe some vibration going on. Well, they came back up and did some more testing. There is some vibration that they're concerned about, and they're going to bring up a crew probably within the next week and take a look at the bearings on that pump and potentially crack open that case of that 1,000 horsepower pump that they rebuilt to try and see what is going on there. In my mind, that gives me much greater comfort with this company that they're actually following up and standing behind the product that they put forth as far as the rebuild is concerned. So we'll see what comes out of that effort. That if we open that pump up and we find that there's a problem, that could change all of this calculation. So we'll see where all this goes. It's an ongoing saga, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a critical part of our system, unfortunately, too.
Right.
Had a much longer discussion in the operations committee the other day, and I think staff's gone through a lot of alternatives and a lot of ways of doing this. One thing that seems to be happening is that there are fewer and fewer places to go get pumps, and they don't have things on the shelf like they used to. And the problem seems to be caused by they're all going to the oil fields and supplying pumps there.
Well, that, and there's not a lot of utilities around the country that, I mean, they might have freshwater pumps of that capacity, but to be able to handle the grid size and all that, how many sewer companies pump that volume and that horsepower? You know?
When Santa Rosa was considering pumping wastewater to the geysers and re-injecting it for their energy project 10 years ago, we were the highest pressure wastewater pumping plant in the state of California. They came up to look at Luther Pass Pump Station. So that tells you,
So it makes sense that there's just not a lot of pumps out there.
When we took this bid from FlowServe, we went out to see what other people were on the market, and I mean that was a bid that you guys had authorized us to do, and another company proposed another pump, but they couldn't pass the solid size, so they were essentially proposing a freshwater pump for our pumping capacity, and so there's just not a lot of these products are not out there.
That's all the more reason to look to see if there's something out there we can grab. Maybe some factories shut down or something. You never know.
These pumps, that horsepower and that pressure rating, they end up fabricating them, and I just don't know that they're out there. There may be out there in like the mining industry, something to that effect. That would be a place where I think you might see large solids passing units with higher pressures. But outside of that, I'm not sure where else.
Well, FlowServe
freshwater pumps from the, when you pump over the grapevine, all that water that gets pumped over there, I thought maybe something like that might be around.
Well, FlowServe said this pump was going to be built in Argentina.
Argentina. The last one, when we had the 1,000 horsepower pump recast, that was done in Canada. And this one, the 700, they said they'd go to Argentina for it.
For myself for putting it on a truck and having our staff drive it down,
And recognize when they cast the 1,000 horsepower pump, they cast the wrong flange on the inlet as well, and they had to come out and refabricate it and correct it. Even though we sent them the old pump, they had it in hand when they miscast it. So we don't have a whole lot of faith in FOSERV at this point.
I get it.
All right, do we have anything else from staff, attorney?
Just a quick one. The hearing on the Demur and the Stevens case was scheduled for tomorrow at 1:30. We got the tentative came out just before this meeting started, and the tentative indicated that the hearing had been continued to February 9th at 1:30. And so nothing will go forward tomorrow, and we'll wait and see what happens. And again, there will be a tentative that comes out before the next hearing date. Usually
Okay, very good. Well, we have a closed session item we need to discuss, so right now let's move out of open session into closed session.